The anime begins with a flashback of war, where a lot of people died, and we see soldiers mourning over a tombstone, including a gloomy young boy. Fast forward to today, where we see Ray White enrolling in the Academy of Sorcery, hoping to live a normal life. However, he's immediately met with hostility from the noble students who look down on him because he's from an ordinary family. He gets in a fight with a noble named Albert, but a beautiful girl intervenes and stops the fight. She introduces herself as Amelia Rose, and she's from the top 3 noble families. During his first class, he retains multiple memories of a horrific battle, and eventually snaps out of it. The students then learn about the 7 Grand Sorcerers, including Academy Principal Abby Garnet, renowned researcher Carol Caroline, and the Ice Blade Sorcerer, who vanished after the Far East War. During their practical training, Ray struggles to understand the basics of sorcery, and his classmates begin calling him Withered. He notices a girl hiding her cloak, who later introduces herself as Elisa, a half-elf girl. Ray also meets his fitness enthusiast roommate, Evie Armstrong, and they bond over their love of bodybuilding. Next day in the morning, while jogging, Ray meets Rebecca Bradley, a third-year student from one of the top 3 noble families. While on his way to the principal's office, Ray bumps into Carol Cleveland, a hyperactive minor noble who is fascinated by her own beauty. Finally, in the principal's office, we see that Ray is talking to the principal, where he reveals that she knows Ray and his connections to the war. Later that day, the students begin practical swordsmanship training, and Ray is matched up against his most zealous rival, Albert. During the fight, Albert tries to defeat Ray, but Ray's skills in sword fighting prove to be superior, leaving Albert ashamed. Abby, the principal, who's observing the battle, reveals that Ray is actually the missing Ice Blade Sorcerer. A few days have passed and Ray is enjoying his life at the school. He chooses to join the Environmental Research Club, where they investigate deep woods, rivers, and glacier areas. The club appears to be full of tough guys, including his roommate. The club's leader claims that Ray cannot keep up this club because he's weak. But all of a sudden, he takes off his clothes and proves them wrong. He then goes on to join the gardening club, but Dina, a member, blocks his entry. Rebecca, who happens to be the club leader, advises Ray to convince Dina to let him join, and Dina challenges him to transform a field into a garden. Despite Dina's initial dissatisfaction, he successfully completes the task, impressing Rebecca and ultimately gaining entry into the gardening club. The Sword Sorcerer tournament is fast approaching, and Rebecca suggests that Ray should participate. However, the evening after, Abby, the principal of the academy, informs Ray that an Imperial spy has infiltrated the school, and advises him to be vigilant about any unusual incidents. Meanwhile, Claire is happy to learn that Ray thinks of her as a friend. During class, the teacher informs the students that they'll have a practical exam in Kafka Forest and must form groups of 4. Ray forms a team with Evie, Elsa, and Amelia, which upsets Albert. The task is to survive the monster-infested jungle for 24 hours and collect stamps from key locations. Ray, who is already skilled, begins collecting stamps by fighting and defeating monsters. However, reflecting on the past conflict, Ray feels guilty for hiding his true identity and enjoying his new life. The next morning, Albert's group confronts a massive monster, but Ray saves the day by defeating it. Everyone's amazed by Ray's strength, and Rose starts to question Ray's background. Suddenly, a cloaked figure appears and uses magic to revive the monster, making it even more powerful. Ray and the group somehow manage to defeat the monster, which enrages Albert even more. They collect all the required stamps and become the top sorcerers in the class. However, it seems that not everyone is happy with Ray's presence in the school, including their teacher, Miss Gray. The next day, Ray decides to visit his master, Lady Lydia, who had bestowed him with the mantle of Ice Blade Sorcerer. Lydia assures Ray that he can always count on her if he needs any assistance. During their conversation, Lydia reveals that she's researching the brain, particularly engrams, a part of the brain where sorcerers' memories are stored. She explains how studying the brain and sorcery can uncover the truth of the world. However, Lydia informs Ray that she received a letter from the Eugenics, a group of individuals who do not care about the ethics of crossing the line of humanity. They've invited Lydia to join them, but she refuses, and according to Carol, the Eugenics have already started contacting other prominent sorcerers. Later at the school, Ray spends his day with Elisa and Clarice, and she later sees Amelia getting out of a carriage. When he tells her about his day, Amelia becomes envious that he spent it with other girls. She then invites him to go with her to the clothes store, and it turns out that she may be developing feelings for Ray. A few days later, Miss Gray speaks to Ray and asks him about his experience as a student at the school and how the other nobles treat him. She begins to doubt herself as a teacher and decides to focus more on teaching rather than her research in sorcery. She ends the conversation by asking Ray to come to her if he faces any trouble. Meanwhile, in Kafka Forest, Albert is doing some intense training to defeat Ray, with a cloaked person monitoring him from above. The next day, students start practicing for the Magic Chevalier. After defeating one opponent, Amelia requests to face Ray, but the teacher interrupts her, saying that he won't be attending the event. Ray decides to accept the challenge anyway. During the fight, Ray gets a flashback that triggers a powerful instinct to fight. However, he immediately stops himself and drops his sword, which results in Amelia's victory. Later in the dining room, Albert challenges Ray to a duel, and they move to a secluded spot surrounded by the barrier. Albert throws Ray an actual sword and they start fighting while the cloaked figure monitors them secretly. Albert tries his best to beat Ray but eventually loses and collapses in despair. As Ray returns to his friends and prepares to reveal his secret, someone casts a gravity spell that pins everyone down except for Ray. The cloaked person then enters and reveals himself as Professor Gray. She further explains that she was responsible for Albert's actions and wants to obtain the potent engram from Ray's brain. After they battle, Professor Gray attempts to trap Ray by harming his companions, but this triggers Ray to tap into his true powers and reveal his identity as the Iceblade Sorcerer. Gray, realizing she has no other option left, tries to convince Ray to join eugenics, but he refuses. In a desperate move, Gray injects herself with an item that causes her to transform into a monstrous creature. The barrier around them begins to fall apart, and Gray tries to hit Ray with fire magic, but it's ineffective against him. As they battle, Ray's body begins to get encased in ice, and his companions begin to worry about his situation. Despite this, Ray somehow defeats Gray and then passes out. In a flashback to the past, we see Lydia discovering a gloomy boy and bringing him back to camp. The boy introduces himself as Ray as he spends time with Lydia and Carol. He starts to recover. The commander asks everyone's opinion on Ray's fate, and Lydia, who's grown attached to him, decides to raise him as a guardian and form a master-disciple bond with him. Fast forward 6 years, Ray has become a skilled fighter and dominates the enemy on the battlefield. However, Lydia and her companions discover signs of overheating, a phenomenon that occurs when someone overuses sorcery to the point of straining their mental condition. Tragically, Ray's close companion Howard dies on the battlefield, causing Ray to lose control and start overheating. Suddenly, he wakes up in the present and finds himself in the hospital bed beside Lydia. After ensuring his safety, Lydia and the maid leave the room. The principal of the school, Abby, then explains to Ray that he initially had doubts about him joining the school due to the nobility's treatment of commoners, but Lydia convinces her to accept them. The principal then leaves and tells her friends to enter, who were standing behind the door. As they enter, Ray apologizes for hiding his true identity as the Iceblade Sorcerer. Ray then reveals that he's caused an overheat during the final battle of the Far East War and has been using Kronos Lock to control it. However, his friends offer their unconditional support and refuse to judge him for his past, which makes him emotional. Later that night, Albert comes to visit him and apologizes for his past actions. The two reconcile and become friends. A few days later, a new replacement teacher comes, and she turns out to be none other than Caroline. Another couple days pass, and we see Amelia reflecting on the differences between her life and Ray's. During the class, Carol, their new teacher, announces a Magic Chevalier tournament between the three academies. The amateur event is for first-year students, and the main elimination event is for second- and third-year students. Ray meets Abby to discuss Carol's role as a teacher, but Carol becomes overly clingy with him. On the day of the selection for the Magic Chevalier tournament, Ray and Clarice observe the early rounds and notice Amelia's not being herself. She reflects on the pressure from her father, who reminded her that as a member of the prestigious Rose family, she must never lose to Ariane, the representative of the rival family. Later at the garden club, Ray learns more about Ariane from Rebecca and Diana, who describe her as a formidable opponent from the Diom Academy, and someone far more powerful than Amelia. Coming back to their selections, Amelia and Albert manage to secure their spots as representatives for their academy, and Amelia's sole focus becomes defeating Ariane. Ray congratulates her on being selected for the tournament and confronts her about the problems, offering to train her. However, he warns her that the journey will be tough. At night, Amelia recalls her past friendship with Ariane, but realizes they drifted apart after Ariane won a duel against her. She knows that as a noble, winning is essential for survival. The next day, Ray starts training Amelia. He gives her the task of running a lap around the academy and entering Kafka Forest without any physical enhancement to test her endurance. Amelia completes the task, but Ray warns her that the next day's training will be even more difficult. That night, Amelia has a strange dream about Ariane, Elisa, Clarice, and Ray. However, her sleep is interrupted by Ray, who wakes her up by banging on a pan outside of her window. When Amelia tries to escape, Ray catches her and drags her back to the training. Ray asks the Hunters Club to become Amelia's cheer group, and they agree to support her. The next day, Elisa and Clarice assist Amelia in her training, and they notice a strange girl passing by. The girl is actually Ray, who's disguised himself and is on his way to the DM Academy. Ray sneaks into the academy and comes across a young girl who is crying as she couldn't find her sister. He introduces himself as Lily and helps her, only to discover that her sister is Ariane, the formidable opponent from the DM Academy. Ray and Ariane have a conversation and she asks him to reveal his true identity. Ray apologizes for lying and introduces himself as Ray White. Back at the academy, Ray helps a girl from falling and meets Maria Bradley, Rebecca's younger sister. She decides to enroll in the academy after meeting Lily, aka Ray. A few days later, Ray introduces his friends to Lydia, and she asks Amelia to talk about something in private. Meanwhile, Clara, the maid, tells Ray that the Empire's assassination squad, the Grim Reapers, have taken action. Clara does not know what they're doing, but the timing worries her, considering the upcoming event. Lydia and Amelia discuss Amelia's problems, which Ray had written to Lydia about, and Lydia provides her with guidance. After finishing their talk, they rejoin the group and head back to the dormitories. Next day, Ray notices that Amelia is performing better, and he gives her some extra training before the final event. The competition starts, and Amelia easily defeats her opponent in the semi-finals. Ray cheers Albert on as it's time for his match against Ariane. Albert puts up a decent fight, but ends up losing at the last moment. As Ray walks through the corridor, we see a mysterious figure following him. He encounters the Environment Research Club leader, Lex, who then takes Ray to Lydia, Abby, and Carol. It turns out he's Carol's younger brother, and a part of the investigation agency. Abby informs Ray that the Grim Reapers have entered the academy with the intention of kidnapping or assassinating noble students. Next day, during the second and third year event, Rebecca manages to reach the finals. Suddenly, Elisa and Clarice come and inform Ray that Amelia is not coming out of her room. Ray goes to visit Amelia that night, and she opens up to him about her problems. Ray listens and provides comfort, helping Amelia to understand her strengths and weaknesses. Amelia finally breaks down in tears and hugs Ray. She then falls asleep while still holding onto his hand. The next day, the first-year rookie event finals begin, and Ray gives Amelia some much-needed encouragement before her match. As Amelia begins to make her way to the stadium, Lex suddenly appears and informs Ray that Clarice and 8 other noble students are missing. Meanwhile, the final match starts, and Ariane uses the same maneuver she used against Albert. However, Amelia manages to counter Ariane and reveals her true strength. At the same time, Ray manages to find Clarice and the other missing students, but he's attacked by the Grim Reapers. He successfully defeats the Reapers by trapping them in ice, and rushes them to the stadium. In that area, Ariane unleashes her full power, and attacks Amelia. She's about to lose, but Ray arrives and calls her name, giving her the boost she needs to surpass her limits. She becomes way too powerful and easily defeats Ariane. The two reconcile and cry together, happy to have resolved their differences. Ray's impressed with Amelia's abilities and congratulates her on her victory. The next day, they all head to the stadium to support Rebecca. During the contest, Rebecca faces off against an unknown rival named Lucas. As soon as the contest begins, Rebecca is immediately defeated. Ray and Lucas cross paths where he reveals to Ray that he has inherited the title of Peerless Blade Sorcerer, just like Ray acquired the Ice Blade. Lucas declares to Ray that he will reveal the full extent of his power and eagerly anticipates defeating him once he's regained his strength. Meanwhile, Carol, Lydia, and Abby investigate the assassins in the dungeon beneath the stadium, but are unsuccessful in getting information from them as they all have anti-interrogation devices implanted in them and commit suicide. Few days have passed and the students are preparing for the council festival. Like every fantasy norm, Ray possesses the idea of a maid cafe, but the noble girls are initially offended by the suggestion of pretending to be servants. However, after seeing Carol posing in a maid outfit, they agree to the idea. As preparations for the cafe continue, Dina tells Ray about Rebecca's engagement, which comes as a surprise to him. That night, we see Rebecca's father making a deal with her fiancé, offering to take care of his daughter. It's discovered that the high-ranking members of Eugenic Organization are searching for Rebecca, intending to make her a vessel. Meanwhile, Rebecca appears to be experiencing some unusual symptoms, as her eyes start bleeding. The next day, Ray congratulates Rebecca on her engagement, but he senses that something isn't right. As they prepare for the maid cafe, Amelia convinces Elvis to wear the outfit. Ray, seeing her in the outfit, compliments her, which makes Amelia jealous. Meanwhile, the men work hard to set up the cafe, thanking Ray for suggesting the idea as part of the cultural festival. In a student council room, Ray realizes that the same members are absent. Rebecca discloses that her fiancé Evan was previously engaged to another student, Cornea, and that she turned the student council against Rebecca. After leaving, Dina approaches Ray and expresses her concern that something's not right with Rebecca's engagement to Evan. Despite Rebecca's reluctance to talk to him, Ray agrees to assist Diana in investigating the situation. Ray visits Lydia's house to gather more information, but Clara denies any issues with the Noble family. However, everyone feels that the engagement is rushed. Lydia promises to investigate the matter and provide information in a week. Meanwhile, Rebecca experiences more frequent eye bleeding and has dreams of Ray in battle. I think that would concern just about anyone. Rebecca's younger sister, Maria, also opposes the engagement, but she gets shut down. During the festival preparations, Ray spends time with Rebecca and even walks her home, but they're interrupted by her fiancé, Evan. Ray becomes suspicious of Evan's intentions, and Lydia later informs him that Evan's family has been missing for a long time, and that their mansion has been abandoned. This raises concerns that Evan may not be who he claims to be, and Ray and Lydia suspect that the phony Evan is actually the sorcery eye collector, a member of the eugenics organization who's eager to collect Rebecca's sorcerer eyes. Evan blackmails Rebecca and threatens her using her sister as leverage. That night, she dreams of Ray on the battlefield, and the next day starts wondering about Ray's origins. Maria visits Ray and asks him to protect her sister, but Rebecca sees them together and becomes jealous. Meanwhile, Ray has a dream about the same funeral he attacked before, but this time he encounters Rebecca. In the dream, he tries to reveal his identity to her, but he wakes up to find his eye bleeding. And so the cultural festival finally arrives and the maid cafe is a hit, who would have guessed. Ray dresses up as Lily to help others and we see everyone having a good time. In the evening, Maria receives a message from a mysterious woman who claims that Rebecca will soon pass away. At the same time, Lydia tells Ray that Rebecca is in danger and that they have a plan to rescue her, which was requested by Rebecca's father. As the day of the awakening approaches, we see the eugenics discussing their plan. Meanwhile, Rebecca asks Ray to look after her sister when she leaves the house due to her engagement. In the midst of the cultural festival, Evan meets Rebecca and teleports her away. Sensing something's wrong, Ray leaves the festival and rushes to her aid. Ray starts fighting the monsters placed by the eugenics and gets helped by his friends. Finally, they manage to defeat the horde and Ray rushes towards Rebecca. He recalls her father mentioning a curse that their family holds. Apparently, if Rebecca is unable to control her sorcerer's eyes, she will die. On the other hand, Maria arrives to help Rebecca, but she's stopped by the members of the eugenics. It's revealed that Evan, the one who orchestrated everything, is actually Lizalette Eden. The real Evan is part of the eugenics. Evan tries to attack Rebecca, but Lise quickly defends her and sends Evan to another realm. Ray joins the battle and is attacked by one of the members named Glutton. However, Lise puts up a barrier and blocks his attack. She explains that she is the sorcerer of fabrication, and she orchestrated all of these events to ensure Rebecca's safety. She tells Ray that she can save Rebecca by overheating her and then uses his Chronos Lock abilities to seal her powers. Ray engages in a battle against Glutton while Lise goes to confront Evan in the other realm. Evan transforms into a monster and attacks her, but she quickly defeats him. Meanwhile, Ray's friends are overwhelmed by the remaining monsters, but Lydia, Abby, and Carol come to their rescue and eliminate the monsters. Ray is struggling to fight against Glutton, but he taps into his ultimate power, Pandora, to freeze Paratrogo and Red Ice and defeat him. While this is happening, Maria witnesses Rebecca overheating and Roy uses Chronos Lock to stop it. Rebecca's father expresses his gratitude towards Ray for saving both of his daughters. Later that night, Rebecca and Amelia compete for Ray's love while waiting for the fireworks. The anime then ends with Ray visiting Howard's grave and remembering all the good times and memories he made this year. But wait, there might be more, because in the post-credits scene, it is revealed that Ray might just have a sister.